Welcome to the Football Debates podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. In this episode, we're going to look at football from the Upper Plains states, specifically from the Dakotas and Montana. We're going to look at some of the teams, players, and coaches that have come from this part of the country. We're going to look at how the football championship subdivision has been dominated by this part of the country since 2008. We're going to look at how some of these players have developed as good college players into good role players at the NFL, and we're starting to see some of these players from this part of the country become Pro Bowl players at the NFL level. And we're going to look at some of the coaches that have come from this part of the country that are now coaching teams at the FBS level, or football bowl subdivision level of college football, including the coaches of Alabama and Tennessee. But to begin with, we're going to look at the football championship subdivision, or FCS, of college football. Since 2008, one of the four teams that we're going to talk about has appeared in the national championship game every year except 2010 and 2016. Since 2011, one of these four teams has won all but two national championships, that being in 2016 and 2020. The four teams that we're talking about that have dominated the FCS are Montana, Montana State, North Dakota State, and South Dakota State. These four teams have absolutely controlled the FCS. In 2016, when James Madison won their national championship, they had to defeat North Dakota State earlier in the playoffs in order to get to the championship game. And in 2020, following the COVID pandemic, Sam Houston State defeated South Dakota State in the national championship game. And they did it by scoring a touchdown late in the fourth quarter to come back and win. Otherwise, these four teams have absolutely controlled the national championship game at the FCS level. And teams know that if you wanted to win, you have to go through Bozeman, Missoula, Brookings, or Fargo. Have to most likely defeat one of these teams on the road to get to that game. From 2011 to 2019, in fact, North Dakota State won all but one of the national championships, and that was the one in 2016 that James Madison won. That, as I said, they had to defeat North Dakota State to get to the championship game. And then in 2020, Sam Houston State defeated South Dakota State. And since then, if you want to watch the FCS National Championship game, it's been dominated by these four teams. From 2021 to 2024, these were the only teams to appear in the National Championship game. In 2021, North Dakota State defeated Montana State. In 2022, South Dakota State defeated NDSU. In 2023, SDSU defeated Montana. And in 2024, North Dakota State again defeated Montana State. In 2025, Montana State won the national championship over Illinois State. I highly recommend that you go and catch the fourth quarter and overtime of that game on YouTube. It's a great watch, great football, and a really enjoyable game to see. But with all those championships, these teams have come to be known to larger schools and to the NFL for recruiting and developing not just good role players at the college level, but good role players at the NFL level. And we're starting to see some big stars come from these teams at the NFL level. Some of the players that you may be familiar with, that some of you may not have heard of some of them. I've mentioned a couple of these players on an earlier podcast. When I watch football, I would like to watch certain players from this part of the country because I'm aware of who these players are and I enjoy watching them play football because they were really trained and developed and taught the basic fundamentals of the game. Some of the players that have come from this area, from South Dakota State, you have Dallas Goedert, longtime tight end for the Philadelphia Eagles and a Super Bowl champion. Some of the other players you have from South Dakota State are Tucker Kraft, another tight end who's now playing with the Green Bay Packers. He came from a town of about 600 in north central South Dakota, a little town called Timber Lake. He's now in line for a big contract extension and is being tabbed by a lot of the football experts as one of the next star tight ends in the NFL. You have Isaiah Davis, who is a running back with the New York Jets. Mason McCormick, who I've mentioned before, he's the starting right guard for the Pittsburgh Steelers at this time. You have Chris Roseboom, who played at South Dakota State, won a Super Bowl with the St. Louis Rams, and I believe this fall he's going to be playing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There are several other running backs from South Dakota State that have either been drafted or made teams' rosters as practice squad players over the last few years also. North Dakota State has contributed a bunch of players also. Carson Wentz was the number 2 overall pick in the draft and was having a great season in Philadelphia early in his career when he tore an ACL. He missed the rest of that season, and that was Philadelphia's first Super Bowl championship over the New England Patriots. You have Trey Lance, who was the number 3 overall pick in the draft. His career didn't work out as well as Carson Wentz's or as well as a lot of other high draft picks. But he is now the backup for the Los Angeles Chargers to Justin Herbert. The quarterback that he replaced was Easton Stick, who is another NDSU quarterback who was the backup for Carson Wentz for multiple years for the Chargers. Some other players from North Dakota State are Chris Watson, who's a star wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers and is a player that the Packers have recently said they want to assign to a contract extension because they see him as a major part of their continued success. Cordell Volson, he was a starting left guard for the Cincinnati Bengals in the Super Bowl that they lost to the Rams. He's an NDSU alum. Cody Mauch, he's a starting guard for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Gray Zabel, who just won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks as their starting left guard. He was a first-round pick, I believe number 18 in the NFL draft. He came from Pierre, South Dakota, P-I-E-R-R-E, that most national people pronounce as Pierre. It was Pierre, South Dakota. He went to Fargo, played for NDSU, won a national championship there, and now he won a Super Bowl. So these teams are really putting a lot of good players into the NFL that are Pro Bowlers and are winning Super Bowl rings. A couple other players that I want to mention are Cam Miller, who was recently a North Dakota State national championship winning quarterback. He was drafted in the 6th round a couple years ago by the Las Vegas Raiders, and a couple of picks before him was a player out of Montana State, Tommy Mellott, who I really enjoyed watching when he was at Montana State. The first time I saw him play, I believe it was his freshman or sophomore year. They were playing South Dakota State in a playoff game, and Mellott was picking the SDSU defense absolutely apart. If they pressured him, he either completed a pass or he scrambled for a big play. If they just let him sit in the pocket, he picked apart their defense. They had no answers for him. Unfortunately for Tommy, I believe it was right at the end of the first half, he scrambled for a touchdown, took a big hit. I believe that he was diagnosed with a concussion, and he missed the rest of the game. South Dakota State came back to win. But he is a great player that the Las Vegas Raiders drafted in the 6th round. They listed him as an athlete because he's a little small for the quarterback at the NFL level, but I can see him making it as like a slot receiver, punt returner type of player. He was also a player that was featured on ESPN. Prior to the draft, they did an article regarding player X, and they gave the background of a player. They didn't tell you where he was from, where he played at, and they kept him as neutral as possible. You just looked at his numbers, his measurables, and compared it to other players from the big name schools, from the big schools like the Oregons and the Texases and the Georgias. And a lot of his numbers were comparable. Now, he was at the FCS level, so it was a little bit lower level of competition, but he's still a good player and was very comparable. Many people guessed correctly that he was player X because after the draft, they revealed, ESPN revealed who he was. ESPN did the same thing this year. And they found another player from this part of the country, from Southwest Minnesota, a player by the name of Zach Durfee. He bounced around, was affected by COVID. He started as a college basketball player, tried to walk on at North Dakota State, but wasn't allowed to because of the COVID restrictions. He ended up at the University of Sioux Falls, played football there, and then transferred out to the University of Washington. Through NCAA regulations and through some injuries, he struggled a little bit, but he was this year's player X in ESPN's pre-draft information, pre-draft article. And he was drafted this year in the 7th round by the Jacksonville Jaguars. In the article, it mentions how the 2 offensive tackles at the University of Washington, who are both playing in the NFL, credited him with making them better and said that oftentimes he was the best player on the practice field at the University of Washington. So we're seeing a lot of good quality players come from this part of the country, which goes to prove that you don't have to be necessarily go to the biggest schools or be the biggest players or be the best names to be able to make a team and impact or make an impact in the NFL. There's a quote I found that I like from former Auburn college coach Shug Jordan. He said, always remember that Goliath was a 40-point favorite over David. The small school players, the small school coaches can be productive at the NFL level and at the major college level. And we're seeing that now with the players moving up, but we're also starting to see some of the coaches start to move up. The University of South Dakota had a longtime football coach retire. The coach that they had replaced him, I believe his name was Travis Johansson, took over as a head coach, was only there for a year or two, and now he's moved up to be the defensive coordinator at Rutgers. South Dakota State has gone through a couple of coaches now in the last few years. After winning their first national championship, their longtime head coach retired. Taking over was Jimmy Rogers. He led South Dakota State to the national championship and an undefeated season the following year. That led him out to Washington State. He was out at Washington State for just 1 year, and he took, by my count, it was roughly about 15 SDSU players with him out to Washington State, including the top 3 running backs that were supposed to be at South Dakota State this past season, 3 of the 4 starters in the secondary, and 2 linebackers. Jimmy Rogers now has moved on to Iowa State. He's moved up to one of the Big 12 teams from Washington State. Iowa State's head coach Matt Campbell has taken over at Penn State, so that allowed Jimmy Rogers to come back to this part of the country. With his connections, I think he might pull away some of those potential recruits from South Dakota State, North Dakota State, Montana, and Montana State. And if he doesn't get them initially, Iowa State could be a destination for some of those players in the transfer portal. 3 other coaches that I want to mention are Chris Klieman. He was a head coach at North Dakota State, was a national championship winning coach there, and he just recently stepped down as a head coach of Kansas State. 2 coaches that I'm a little bit familiar with are Kalen DeBoer, the head coach at Alabama, and Josh Heupel, the head coach at Tennessee. Kalen DeBoer is from northeast South Dakota, a little town called Milbank, and played football at the University of Sioux Falls. He eventually ended up back at Sioux Falls and was a head coach there. In 5 years, going 67-3 with 3 national championships. When I was a high school coach in southeast South Dakota, I had a few of my players go and play for him. They loved playing for him. They said he was a great coach, very personable, but very demanding. Another coach who I'm familiar with is Josh Heupel. I went to college in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and I worked under Josh's dad, Ken Heupel, who was the defensive coordinator at the time at Northern State University. Josh was a great high school player, bounced around a little bit in college before finally ending up at Oklahoma, where he won the national championship as a quarterback there and was second in the Heisman Trophy voting. He was drafted and then had some arm and shoulder issues, so his NFL career was cut short. But he went through the coaching ranks and eventually now has landed at the University of Tennessee, where his offenses are year in and year out some of the best in the country. So you have a lot of these good players and coaches coming from this part of the country that are now getting the recognition that they deserve, even though they're coming from small towns like Timberlake and Milbank and other smaller areas in this part of the country. These teams, these players have been kind of hidden gems. While they're not getting the publicity, and many of them are simply not as talented as players coming from Texas or Florida or Ohio, they're still good quality people, good quality players that come from here. And the FBS has seen this, and they know this. The football bowl subdivision, the big boys, the Alabamas, the Tennessees, the Michigans, they don't want to play these schools anymore. They don't want to lose to the FCS schools, the lower schools. In the early 2010s, North Dakota State played Iowa, Kansas State, and Kansas on the road and defeated all 3 of them. So these small towns in the Upper Plains states are starting to be noticed for producing college football players. While they're not necessarily the same type of athletes that you'll get from Florida or Texas or Ohio, these are good quality people, good solid college football players that hopefully with time and development can end up at the NFL level. You're starting to see with the transfer rules, these players start out at a North Dakota State or a South Dakota State, move on to an FBS program such as Miami or Northwestern or Washington, and then end up either drafted or signing as undrafted free agents at the NFL. A couple of players I'm going to watch for the next few months, it'll be interesting to see where they end up, are 2 former South Dakota State football players. The first one is Mark Gronowski. He's a quarterback at South Dakota State, led them to 2 national championships, and then he moved on to the University of Iowa, where he had a decent season. He signed as an undrafted free agent with the Miami Dolphins, so it'll be interesting to see if he ends up on the Miami Dolphins roster or on practice squad with either the Dolphins or one of the other NFL teams. Another player is a safety. Even though he's kind of on the smaller side, he does have some athletic ability that might be able to land him on an NFL roster. His name is Tucker Large. He started out at South Dakota State, moved on to Washington State under head coach Jimmy Rogers, and was signed as an undrafted free agent with the Philadelphia Eagles. He has enough athletic ability that might get him on special teams. In fact, he had a couple of punt returns for touchdowns while he was in college. So hopefully that athletic ability will translate to the NFL level. If he doesn't make it with the Eagles, maybe he can make it again, like Mark Gronowski, either on a team's practice squad or at the tail end of the roster. But there is one college football player that I'm going to keep my eye on this fall, and that's a wide receiver for Northwestern by the name of Griffin Wilde. I'm sure the NFL scouts know who he is at this point. He started out at South Dakota State and then transferred to Northwestern this past season. He led the Northwestern Wildcats in receptions and yards with 71 catches for 880 yards. He had more than double the number of receptions as the number 2 receiver. So it'll be interesting to see how this fall goes for him at the college level. And I expect that he'll probably be a day 3 pick or an undrafted free agent in next year's NFL draft, just depending on how this next college season goes. But with these teams that we've been talking about, Montana, Montana State, North Dakota State, and South Dakota State, even with their dominance over the FCS, things can and do change. In fact, this fall, North Dakota State is moving out of the FCS and is moving up to the Football Bowl subdivision. So instead of playing the University of North Dakota and South Dakota State and the University of South Dakota, they're now going to be playing Fresno State and Nevada and UNLV and Hawaii. Traditionally, the teams moving from the FCS to the FBS do struggle to have that same level of success. One of the exceptions to the rule is James Madison, which with their transition over the last few years, they have had that success at the FBS level. Hopefully North Dakota State can have success also and start playing some non-conference games against USC or Texas or Florida and get that recognition for North Dakota State and the Upper Plains and provide a showing of their program and hopefully have more people other than just the NFL scouts realize that, hey, there's good quality football up in this part of the country. So let's look at the Upper Plains states. This has been the Football Debates podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you on our next episode.